My name is Jess Tansey. I'm at the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research. I'm also the parent of one, soon to be two, children in Chicago Public Schools. And I'm going to kick us off and dive right in so that we can use all the time that we have today. In a minute, I will share, just switch my screen here. Great. In a minute, I will share a bit of how we will use our time here today. But before we go there, I wanted to root us in our why. My colleagues and I are gathered here today. We do this work because we want to help improve the experiences and outcomes of young people in schools. And for us, this means collaborating with folks in school communities, in districts, education systems, and ecosystems to identify areas of strength, need, opportunity, to ask questions, and to seek answers. And it means sharing what we learn together and thinking about how to make sense of that, and sharing it even more widely, so that others can learn from it too. So this collaborating and this sharing, it's not a piece of our work, it is our work. And this conversation here today is really important for us. It also feels timely, given shifts in local and national education systems. Here in Chicago, we have moved from a small, mayorally appointed Board of Education to a 21-member, currently hybrid elected appointed and soon to be fully elected school board. We want to make sure that we are offering the data and research insights from the last 35 years of partnership with those elected school board members and appointed school board members and all the folks they represent, so that collectively we can contribute to their understanding and their decision-making in terms of school contexts and school communities. And federally, we're working under an administration that is working to gut and dismantle our Department of Education, including some longstanding publicly available data sets and research insights and support for the kind of research evidence and work that we are talking about today. As we move to discuss in lots of different shapes and forms this question here, what insights and improvements are possible when school systems and research partners collaborate, we hope that today's discussion sparks ideas and insights, questions, maybe some inspiration for you in terms of what evidence-informed practices and policies can look like and what they can mean for students and school communities. We have folks across Chicago, across Illinois, across the country. Last we checked, I think it was 26 states, and even a couple international folks here today. We'll launch a poll to see who is with us in this virtual room here today. Jessica, if you can launch that. And while folks move to their cursor and fill that out and also share the hat that you are wearing or the hats that you are wearing, with our panelists and with each other, I will just share a bit of how we will use our time here. We will hear from CPS research partners and district collaborators and dig into what research practice partnerships are and what they look like. Elaine Allensworth, my colleague at the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research, and Sarah Dixon, head of the Chicago Public Schools Office of External Research, will lead us through that. And then we have a panel of leaders across 5 Chicago research partners answering these 3 questions on the clearest evidence, on what they are working on now, and how we can all best work together in this work. Our panel is led by Pranav Kathari, CEO of Revolution Impact and chair of the Illinois Board of Higher Education. If you know Pranav, you know he's been doing evidence-informed work in education for a long time, and you know he is both thoughtful and people-oriented in that work. So we are in great hands for the panel, and we are all in great hands because he will also make sure that we have time for Q&A. And so make sure you are saving your questions and sharing your questions in the Q&A box with our panelists. We'll make sure to make some time for those. And it looks like we've got a nice mix of folks here today. Love to see it. I'm trying to move across my different screens. And it looks like our Chicagoans are representing. Love to see it. And so with that, I'm delighted to welcome, to kick us off, Bogdana Chkoumbova, Chief Education Officer of Chicago Public Schools. We will drop a biostock in the chat for everyone so that you can see the experiences and the journeys that everyone here has been on until today. The one thing I will mention is that she started her career in Chicago Public Schools as a teacher and has worn many different hats and played many different roles in the system, and so has some great perspective to share with us on how folks in Chicago Public Schools and folks leading Chicago Public Schools are thinking about how evidence-informed practices and policies show up in their work. I will pass the mic to you Chief Education Officer Bogdana Chkoumbova.
Everyone, good afternoon. Let me see. Yes, you can see me and hear me. I'm super excited to be here today again. Bogdana Chkoumbova, Chief Education Officer for Chicago Public Schools. And I am particularly excited to participate and kick off this discussion about the research partnership between our district and many critical partners. Why? Because this is the partnership that plays one of the most critical roles in helping our district continuously improve and make progress in name of student outcomes, student practices, and student experiences across our district. The research partners that we have play a very critical role to help us achieve our vision. Most specifically, they inform not only our strategy, but also our decision-making, and helps us also track whether or not our efforts are producing the outcomes that we intend to do. So they're really involved in our work in the work around continuous improvement along the way. I think the best way for me to illustrate the impact of this partnership is to really share very briefly few examples. As you can probably guess, like in any large urban district, post-secondary success is one of our top priorities. Our partnership with UChicago, the To and Through project, has been absolutely invaluable in a resource for all of us. Their annual education attainment report provides us with very rich data and insights that we use to build our post-secondary strategy and pathways for students. And to be specific, in their latest research and report, while they highlighted a lot of the progress that our high schools are making in this journey, they also cited the need for us to continue to craft our strategies to better support students who are situated furthest from opportunities. I am really excited to see that they're represented today, and you probably will hear from them directly. But one other aspect that I also want to elevate is that we partner with researchers not only around areas of improving academic performance for students. Another one of our priorities is around helping our schools to craft the environments where students and staff feel valued, feel well supported, and nurtured. And recently, at the heart of this matter also got a debate over whether or not our high schools should have school resource officers, also known as SROs, which are actually police officers who work part-time in our schools. Last year, ultimately, the decision was made to remove the police officers from our campuses. As you can imagine, this is a very sensitive issue, and the University of Chicago Consortium was an outstanding partner for us. They oversaw a research report, compared a lot of data and metrics for our schools with and without SROs, and actually provided us with the data and the information that we needed to make this very critical decision. Specifically, they didn't find significant disparities around disciplinary outcomes or perceptions of a school climate and culture in schools with and without SROs. As you can understand, having this data and this research really helps us to make the decisions, to be reassured, and to have the confidence and choose the directions in which we want to move the district. At CPS, we are always very grateful. I think that we are absolutely fortunate to have the reach and very supportive research community, and we're working to leverage their insights and their work in all of the work that we do in our district. So I know that you will be hearing from a lot of panelists, but as a practitioner, I want to say that their work and their insights are very much appreciated. We feel very fortunate, again, to have the support from our research community. And we are making a lot of investments to be strong partners as well. We have our Office of External Research. I just want to give shout out to our director, who is here, and I believe I'm turning it over to the next speaker soon. But again, thank you so much for being here today, and I hope that we all learn from the panelists.
Thank you so much, Chief Chkoumbova, for sharing. And we will hear more about that. I will pass it to Elaine Allensworth and Sarah Dixon to share in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Jess. So, hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Allensworth. I'm the Executive Director of the UChicago Consortium. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we do. The consortium was created in 1990 to conduct research of high technical quality to inform and assess policy and practice, and to do that research with a strong emphasis on engagement with the education community in Chicago. So we hear what information people need, and we can be responsive to those needs. And we're working with the people who will actually use the research for school improvement, not just speaking to other researchers. Much of our impact comes from supporting communication among different education stakeholders so that we have a common base of evidence from an independent source that people can trust, and that allows people to have productive conversations. So we're not arguing over facts, but we're discussing solutions. And independence is a crucial part of that. It means we share the good news about what's happening in the district, but we also share the hard stuff. And that's the only way to remain valuable to the district in the long term and to serve the broader community. So we've seen that by embracing evidence and equity, the district has supported improvements in student outcomes across many different measures. So here you can see high school graduation. We've also seen large improvements in college degree attainment, the quality of instruction, and school climate. We've also seen downturns during some periods. The data provide clarity about where there has been improvement, where more work is needed, and what actually matters. And that evidence has been really crucial for continuing support of initiatives that have had success. You know, there's a lot of turnover in school districts and in schools, and so you really need that evidence to keep those things going that have been successful. And you also need the data so that you have the evidence that you need in order to modify those things that are not working well in schools. So the consortium was the first place-based education research practice partnership in the country. Research practice partnerships are long-term, mutually beneficial collaborations between education researchers and practitioners in school districts and state departments of education. That long-term commitment is really critical because it means we're developing knowledge over time, going back and forth, building what we know. We're not going to have one study that's going to figure everything out. This really is a collaborative effort. And this has been really successful. And in fact, many other cities across the country have decided that they also want to have their own place-based research practice partnership. And the National Network of Education Research Practice Partnerships was founded in 2016 to help support the development of research practice partnerships across the country and across the world. And our colleagues today each have their own research practice partnerships here in Chicago. So we at the consortium focus on K-12 education in Chicago. EC Reach focuses on early childhood. The labs focus on program evaluation. iWork works at the state level in the state context, and To and Through focuses on what it takes to get students through to college graduation. Each research partner teams with at least one CPS office on each project. So in the consortium alone, we're working right now today with folks in teaching and learning, the talent office, multilingual and multicultural education, early childhood, safety and security, and on and on. Many different partners within the district. But our key partners on everything are the folks in the external research department. And Sarah Dixon is the director of external research.
Thank you, Elaine. Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Dixon, and I'm glad to be here today. Appreciate Elaine for providing some context around RPPs in general, and then also about the partnership between CPS and the consortium more specifically. I will echo Chief Chkoumbova in saying that we are truly lucky in Chicago to have the opportunity to work and partner with a number of incredible research organizations, some of whom are with us today. We're proud to be leaders in the RPP field and the field of education research. Our work with the consortium has been absolutely instrumental and frankly has been really pivotal in the growth of education RPP work nationwide. But it also has led in Chicago to an expansion of those that we're lucky enough to work with in terms of this research practice partnership work. So today I'm excited that, not just the consortium and to and through are here, but we also have Crime and Ed Labs. We have our EC Reach partners. We have folks from iWork, and it's good to be in Chicago. We certainly have a lot of wonderful folks to work with. The research that we engage in alongside our partners reflects the priorities of the district. So I wanted to take some time with you all to very briefly share our guiding lights, both for practice and for research with this group. So Chicago Public Schools has recently adopted a new school accountability framework. The Continuous Improvement and Data Transparency Policy, referred to as CIDT, because what education really needs is more acronyms, but it is represented by the pyramid on this slide in the center. CIDT is a transformative and holistic approach to school accountability, and instead of focusing solely on student outcome data like grades and test scores, it also clearly articulates what conditions, supports, and resources are needed in order to create a successful school environment for all students. And Together We Rise, which you'll see on the right side of the screen, is the 5-year strategic plan for Chicago Public Schools. This plan identifies the strategies that the district is committed to and investing in over the next 5 years in order to get to that goal of successful school environments for all students as defined by CIDT. And all of this work is flowing through the CPS equity framework, which uses a targeted universalism approach to ensure that everyone in the district is making decisions grounded in and in pursuit of equity and in support of a daily learning experience for all of our students that is rigorous, joyful, and equitable. So when we think about research in Chicago Public Schools, we draw upon all of these frameworks to guide our work and to define our priorities. And we also, importantly, draw upon the expertise, the shared learning, the best practices, and collaborations from our research partners to inform and to implement an equity-centered research approach. We believe that an equity-centered research approach will result in research that connects us to and learns from a radically inclusive range of experts in order to provide CPS communities with meaningful and accessible knowledge that really empowers the district and its stakeholders to collectively build equitable learning environments for every student in every school. I'm really, really lucky to be in my position. I get to work with some of the most brilliant people I've ever had the privilege of meeting. And with that very brief overview of how we think about research and partnership in CPS, I will hand things over to Pranav to move us into our panel discussion.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elaine and Sarah, for that introduction. Welcome and thank you all for joining us for this important discussion. We have an incredible group of panelists representing key research practice organizations that support Chicago Public Schools. Their work helps CPS educators and key stakeholders improve experiences and outcomes for our students. It's about collaborative approaches to addressing CPS challenges and to identifying bright spots and working to build and spread them. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. First, from the Illinois Workforce and Education Research Collaborative, known as iWork, we have Meg Bates, who specializes in workforce readiness and post-secondary success. From the Early Childhood Research and Practice Collaborative, EC Reach, we have Terry Sable, whose work focuses on supporting the development and learning of our youngest students. Representing the University of Chicago Education Lab, Monica Bott, who tackles some of the most pressing challenges in education, including equity and attendance. From the To and Through project, we have Don McCoy, dedicated to providing data, to help us support students navigating the path to and through college. And finally, from the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research, who you've heard from, Elaine Allensworth, who brings insights of long-term trends and systemic improvements in CPS. Today's discussion will focus on the role of data and research in supporting CPS priorities and partnerships. We'll explore how research organizations can not only inform decision-making, but also strengthen the relationships and work happening at the community level. I do want to double down on something that Jess mentioned at the opening. This work has become that much more important since January 20th, given how much the federal government has sort of taken away from our focus on research, it focus on knowledge, focus on what works. So I think in Chicago, we are collectively committed to making sure this work continues to grow and is strengthened, because this is exactly how we solve problems. We look at the data, we talk to stakeholders, we engage in solutions, and then we test and improve. And that is simply the philosophy that we've taken in our city, and that we will continue to take in our city, regardless of what's happening in Washington. With that, I want to make sure we have time for our panel. And like I said, as Jess noted, we'll have time for Q&A near the end of our session. First, I'd like to ask all of our panelists around what is the clearest evidence from your research partnership about what improves student school outcomes? And how did those findings actually play out in CPS? And why don't we start with Elaine and the consortium?
Okay, thanks, Pranav. So we've seen big change in Chicago, and we realized that continuous improvement and big change really requires a data-informed culture that's focused on the right indicators. So I showed you the graph of improvements in high school graduation rates. That really came from recognizing the need to focus on the 9th grade year, and specifically on attendance and course pass rates in the 9th grade. And that really drives graduation. By focusing on the right indicators, developing systems for using those indicators, that's how we saw the big improvements in high school graduation rates, as well as other high school outcomes. I'll just say two more really quickly. A second thing is that we just have so much evidence now about how students and teachers' reports of their experiences in schools are highly predictive of whether their school is going to show improvement and be able to adopt new initiatives successfully. We've had a long time partnership with CPS around the 5 essential surveys and now Cultivate surveys, which provide data so that folks in schools can get the feedback from their students and their teachers to understand what's happening in their schools. And I'll say just the third thing is a lot of research on principal leadership and how principals support school improvement through teacher leadership. And that's really been picked up by a lot of different partners in the education community here in Chicago who are making that research, putting that research to work.
Awesome. Thank you, Elaine. And let's stick with our friends at U Chicago and go to Dom at the To and Through Project.
Good. Great to see everybody this afternoon. Yeah, I mean, I think I want to build on that. I think some of the best evidence that we see and part of our work is tracking our progress. But some of the best evidence is that the outcomes are changing for students, right? Chief touched on this, which I really appreciated, and I think is illustrative of the partnership that we're really thankful for with CPS. But part of our work is at To and Through is tracking both for the district and for our whole ecosystem here in the city, college attainment for Chicago Public School students. And one way that we do that is that we publish an annual projection that takes a look at, the percentage of 9th graders starting in CPS today that we would expect to have a college degree or certificate within the next 10 years if none of our kind of rates change, right? We started tracking that for the first time annually in 2012. And when we first published that number, it was 21%. We were projecting that 21% of 9th graders starting high school that year would have a degree within the next 10 years. What's been really exciting for us, and I think for this work and illustrative of some of the progress, is that we've now spent enough time tracking this and working on this problem collectively that we have the ability to look back in time and see how did we do with our projection? And one thing that we've been incredibly excited about that we were able to report this year is that we were wrong about that 21%. And we were wrong in the right direction. We don't usually like being wrong, but we really like being wrong about this projection, particularly when the true attainment actually outpaced that projection. So for that class, the actual attainment was 27% of that class, right? And 27% on its own is not the most exciting number. Recognize that there's still a lot of room to grow. But I think, again, we put in the context and history behind who are the students that we're serving, and the college pathways that we're trying to help our students be successful on, and the just scale of the work here in Chicago. We actually break down the numbers. That represents over 1,600 more CPS alumni that actually earn degrees, right? And so we're really excited about that progress. Again, we put out a projection in this latest report for students that are entering into CPS today. And that number now is 31% is what we are projecting that class. We've seen some of that growth. And again, we want that number to be wrong. And so I think what's really exciting about that part of the partnership and annual conversation that we get to have using the data every year is collectively saying, again, we would project that 31% of students would have a degree or certificate in the next 10 years, but if nothing changes. And I think we've learned in Chicago that change is possible. And we like to collaborate with everybody using data to understand how we can organize what we want to do different to better support students and make sure we see more students actually getting degrees.
Awesome. Thank you, Dom. And I think just that emphasizing that point of, even though we're often used to looking at percentages, being able to translate into actual numbers and actual students really gives the work some gravity, and really helps people understand like how much change is happening, how much improvement is happening. All right, let's head up Lakeshore Drive to Evanston and hear from our good friend Terry at EC Reach, which is based at Northwestern University.
Thanks so much for having me. So I should say that the Early Childhood Research Alliance of Chicago at Northwestern is relatively new. We've been around for about 18 months, and our focus is on the birth to 5 age group. So in Chicago Public Schools, what that means is we focus on kids in pre-K at 3, at 4, and then we follow them into the early elementary school years. And so our first sort of interest in connection with Chicago Public Schools has really been to try to understand what the landscape looks like for the youngest learners within Chicago Public Schools. So as one example, this fall, there was that really positive news at CPS that there was an uptick in enrollment overall in Chicago Public Schools. And we had a hypothesis that, or question about whether this, what was going on in the early years. And it turns out over the past 4 years, there's been an increase, about a 6% increase in pre-K and kindergarten enrollment, and about a 2% increase in 1st through 4th grade. And this is in contrast to the middle grades and the high school grades, which is actually declined. And so this actually suggests a really positive news for the health of Chicago Public Schools, where there are more kids entering the system at the younger grades, and hopefully they'll stick around. And I should also note that this is not driven by sort of population trends across these age groups. In fact, the birth rates in Chicago have been on the steady decline for about 3 decades. And so there's lots of reasons it could be, but one kind of bright spot for Chicago Public Schools, again, is the expansion of universal pre-K in 2019. So a second key area of our partnership with CPS has been trying to understand the impact of the universal pre-K expansion that that was started in 2019 to provide universal preschool for all 4-year-old children throughout the city, free of charge. It was an incredibly exciting intervention, and it turns out that also worked. So if you built it, did they come? They actually did. We see a nice increase in the number of children who are enrolled in free full-day preschool. What that means for kids' outcomes, we are still poking around, but we know from past evidence that that pre-K is really good for families in terms of economic benefits, as well as developmental benefits. And so our work with Chicago Public Schools has really been to try to get into the weeds about kind of how that expansion has happened and whether it's expanded equitably, which it has.
Awesome. Thank you, Terry. Let's zoom out a little bit and look statewide. So we'll move on to Meg at iWork, and iWork is based out of the U of I, University of Illinois system. Meg, would love to hear a little bit about what is the sort of those evidence bases that you've identified that are playing out in CPS and probably more broadly.
Yeah, thank you so much, and great to be here. So first, I'd say a finding that we're using a lot is our work on access to rigorous coursework. And so this means access to coursework like dual credit and advanced placement. We found it to be a key lever for improving college access and persistence, especially for students who have historically been marginalized from college. And so increasing that access in an equitable way is something that K-12 districts can do to support student success. And we've been working with some of our wonderful policy partners at Latino Policy Forum and also with our state partners to help districts understand levers for doing that, levers for increasing that access. I think another thing, building on consortium's, really wonderful long-term work on the importance of school leadership. Last year, we conducted a statewide survey with over 4,000 teachers about the factors that cause them to stay in or leave the profession or move schools. And what we saw is that, despite all the things going on in schools these days, leadership is still the #1 issue, relationships with leaders. And so good leadership, critical for teachers and students. And that kind of finding has informed some of our ongoing work with the State Board of Education around teacher recruitment and retention. And then finally, kind of a newer finding from our shop is that we found that kindergarten readiness, the state has a kindergarten readiness measure that is used statewide. We saw that it does predict later school achievement and success in Illinois. And so we can, surmise that investing in early childhood is very important for later academic success. And that can be done in many ways, not just early childhood education.
Awesome. Thank you, Meg. And we'll wrap up back with our friends at UChicago with Monica from the UChicago Education Lab. What are those evidence pieces that we've identified and how they played out in CPS to date?
Sure, thanks, Pranav. So the University of Chicago Education Lab has been around for about 13 or 14 years now. And the reason that we exist and the kind of work that we focus on is to say, when the consortium comes out with a report, something like the Potholes to, a progress report, where you say, 9th grade algebra is a really key indicator of whether a kid ends up being successful in, later on in life in terms of high school graduation and post-secondary success. We sort of looked around and said, like, okay, what are the kinds of student-centered and centered design interventions that can actually make a difference for changing those outcomes? And as Dom said, change is really possible. So thing one that we've been working on Chicago Public Schools for the past decade or more on is tutoring and high dosage tutoring. So when a kid is not performing at grade level, the thing that is going to help them learn and grow is really high dosage tutoring, which means a tutor is or a tutorial is offered during the school day. It's provided by like a trained and paid tutor. A kid is getting a substantial amount of it during the school day. And so we did some work with a partner, Saga Education at the time, that came out of matched charter schools in Boston. We actually had done a national search for academic interventions. We worked with Chicago Public Schools in the mayor's office to figure out a way to bring them to Chicago to do a pilot test at Harper High School at the time, and saw that this was really helpful for kids in terms of, helping them learn math. And then we expanded that to about 2,500 kids in the following year and 2,500 kids the year after in about 17 high schools. And really based on the sort of strength of the evidence, we stood up randomized control trials to really isolate the effect of the program and the tutoring, because you don't want to just say, well, it's because, it's the kids that raised their hand that really are contributing to the outcome. We saw huge improvements in math learning at this, what I would call moderate scale. And so what we've been doing with Chicago Public Schools for the past decade or so is trying to figure out, can you scale that? How can you scale that? And that has led to the launch in the post-pandemic world of the CPS Tutor Corps, where CPS is trying to provide tutoring to over 200 schools via kind of an institutionalized tutor program. And we're partnering with them to study that and understand its outcomes as well. So that's like one thing that seems to really cross geography, grade, subject area. Turns out if anyone wants to learn anything, the best way to do it is with a human being there showing you how to do it. If I were going to learn how to play the piano, I might watch a YouTube video and learn, but chances are if somebody actually came to my house or, my place of work and sat down with me day after day and showed me how to do it, like I probably could play a few scales. So that's kind of the analogy here. And the real trick is figuring out how to do that at scale. So Chicago Public Schools has, over 300,000 students. many of whom are not performing at grade level yet, and so could benefit from this kind of individualized and personalized instruction. And it's probably not practical for every kid to have their own tutor, or even every 2 kids. And so we've been really working on trying to figure out how to scale, how to have the right mix of technology and human beings to provide that personalized support so that every kid is getting a math problem that's like just beyond what they think they can do, practicing that math problem, really focused in a consistent way, and then learning and gaining a sense of self-efficacy. So that's like thing 1. The second thing is restorative practices. So CPS has really been a leader in the field in rolling out restorative practices, which is basically an alternative to punitive measures of school discipline. And there's a lot of ideological perceptions about whether restorative practices is a really good thing, whether it's being too soft or lenient. And there wasn't a lot of research and data to sort of say, like, this is an empirical question. CPS has rolled this out again to like 200 schools. What are the outcomes of students? And here we see that restorative practices can reduce arrests in and outside of school for violent and nonviolent offenses, and it might generate sort of positive and genuine improvements in student behavior, which is really helpful. And I think that's like an example of when you have these ideological preferences, sometimes empirical and rigorous research can really help to say, here's something that actually works. And along those lines, the last sort of thing that I will say is the University of Chicago Education Lab. We have a sister lab. We call it the Crime Lab. Our faculty director sort of works on both topics. And one thing that we've really done is to try to understand how to support students for whom the mainstream education system isn't working. So students who might be stopping out, dropping out, sort of feeling very disconnected to school. And it's not causal, but oftentimes what we see is these things move together. So the less schooling attachment you have, the higher risk for violence involvement you have. And people don't live their lives in silos. What we want to do is make sure we're keeping kids safe and helping them get attached to pro-social institutions like school and work. And one of the best ways that we think we know how to do that is through what you might call metacognitive interventions like cognitive behavioral therapy. So Choose to Change is a program that we've studied. Becoming a Man is another program that we've studied. One Summer Chicago, which is a jobs program, had a really strong cognitive behavioral component. Those are just examples of programs, but it's really the strategy of cognitive behavioral therapy that seems to be really helpful. And so again, working with Chicago Public Schools, not just to evaluate these programs, thinking about how to get them to kids who, might benefit most from them, but then also continuing evaluating them so that we understand what the actual outcomes are and can make decisions accordingly.
Awesome. Thank you, Monica. I appreciate it. So that was a little bit about what do we know and how did it play out and how did it apply in CPS. What I next want to ask about is like, what are you working on now? What are we trying to learn? So I know that's always sort of, some researchers get very scared when I ask a question about prospective findings, but really want to get a sense of like, what are you working on now? What are you trying to understand? What are you trying to learn? And we'll start again with Elaine at the consortium.
Thanks, Pranav. Yeah, we have a lot of work going on. Chronic absenteeism, of course, is a great concern these days. So we have a lot of work looking at chronic absenteeism in CPS. Another study on career and technical education that we're doing with iWork. A study looking at teacher recruitment and retention in hard to staff schools. We have a long-standing partnership with the Latino Policy Forum. We've been doing research and are continuing to do research to support the district around supporting multilingual learners. We also have a study looking at early literacy, recovery from the pandemic, and implementation of the Skyline curriculum.
Awesome. Thank you, Elaine. Let's go to Dom at 2 and through.
Sticking to my list. We got 3 things I wanted to elevate. So we are currently working on building a new lens of our 2 and through milestones tool that provides publicly available data on CPS student outcomes that's specifically designed for higher ed institutions that are supporting CPS students, and that we're using in partnership with higher ed institutions and folks in Chicago around trying to develop supports that are focused on persistence and completion. We are actively collecting qualitative data on CPS parents and families' experiences navigating the college search and selection process that we're using in collaboration with practitioners to help think through and develop and strengthen strategies around parent engagement in that critical transition for 12th graders. And then third, we're also working alongside CPS and other partners around the city on continuing to clarify vision for post-secondary success in the middle grades, where we know it's critically important for long-term success that's using both experiential data and some of the outcomes indicators that we know are predictive of future success.
Awesome. Thank you, Dom. Terry, how about for what are we trying to learn for our youngest Chicagoans?
Sure. So we are knee-deep in a mixed method study on the impact of universal pre-K. As I mentioned earlier, we've already looked at the effect of access and on the broader childcare market, and we are now turning to looking at the impact on child outcomes. And we are lucky that the city and the state have invested in measures of kids' readiness at kindergarten entrance and kind of followed through the elementary school. We also have interviews with parents, providers, principals to kind of understand how they make meaning of that. So we're working on that too. And then the second big bucket is, so we built pre-K ostensibly, hopefully we've got a group of kids who are kind of more ready to learn when they enter kindergarten. What happens to them once they kind of go through elementary school? And how do we think about pre-K to 2 alignment? So we think about that both in terms of assessments, how do we track that? And then also in terms of instructional support and curriculum. And the point here is like, we want to make sure kids are getting more kind of skills that build on each other, but we also don't want to turn pre-K into the new high school. So how do we focus on kind of the developmentally appropriate practices that we know young kids need in the earliest years?
Awesome. Thank you, Terry. How about Meg at iWork? What are you hoping to learn over the next few months and years here?
Yeah, so 3 things very quickly. First one is we put out this week a new study about teacher shortages with a bunch of our partners. We publish on teacher shortages a lot, so there will be some coming in April and May as well, kind of diving into the data that were released this week. On March 25th, we have a report coming on computer science education. It's part of a series, and the focus for this one is on teacher credentials and computer science across the state. And then lastly, like the consortium, we're looking at student absenteeism. So we have a report coming out hopefully in May around the relationship between student absenteeism and test scores and how that maybe has changed from pre to post pandemic.
Oh, interesting. Excellent. Thank you, Meg. Monica?
Sure. Yeah, before I go into my very quick list, it's just so nice to hear about all the amazing work that is happening across the board. I'm very excited and can't wait to sort of learn about what you're learning. So a few quick things. One is scaling things like tutoring and high dosage tutoring through an evaluation of the tutor core. The other is scaling metacognitive supports like cognitive behavioral therapy. And so one sort of sub project of that is creating an open source cognitive behavioral therapy curriculum for kids who are disengaged from school and or at really high risk for gun violence involvement, and trying to think about how we can work with CBOs and schools to take that up. Along a similar vein, working with our option schools or alternative schools in Chicago public schools and trying to figure out how we can sort of bring personalized supports to students to improve their outcomes. And then finally, looking at the long-term effects of student interventions like tutoring and CBT and restorative practices now that we have sort of a decade or more of information.
Awesome. Excellent. Thanks. We opened the session really talking about what RPPs are, like how they function, how the consortium in particular was founded and scaled. So as our final question, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you all, like what are the mechanics and what makes for good, productive partnerships between your organizations and the district? We know, like in Elaine's opening, she talked about, it's not always good news. Sometimes we're learning things that are not really lovely, and that's okay. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about how do you make sure these partnerships are built, designed well, structured well, they're producing valuable research, and they're really meaningful to both policy and practice. And then as you're thinking about that response, would love to hear a little bit about like, how do you think sort of community comes into the conversation as you're thinking about these partnerships? So the direct parties are often the researchers in the district, but there's obviously a large stakeholder group surrounding them. So would love to hear a little bit about how community voice comes into your work. And Elaine, since you sort of opened with RPP, so I'd love to start with you on this.
Thank you. And I'm going to just build on what you were just saying, because, I think research practice partnership work is very demanding, both on the research and the practice partners. So, there are, any initiative you're trying to implement in schools, there are always going to be unanticipated consequences. So it's really important to monitor what's happening and to really be setting it with data and evidence. And so as a research partner, you want your practice partner to really be championing the use of data and evidence. But it's going to be really hard, because if we're going to find, you want to find things that aren't working in order to improve them, right? Like that's part of the goal, but that's going to be so hard to have those discussions and for your practice partner to then have to figure out what to do. And so, you need the practice partner to be open to hearing all the news about what's working and what's not working. But you need the research partner to really be sensitive and to give people time to process those findings. You don't want to just put out something and say, oh, this didn't work the way it was, intended to. That will ruin your partnership. And that does not actually help your practice partner at all. It does the opposite. You want to give them time to actually process the findings and then help provide the data and evidence they need as they try to figure out solutions for working on improving whatever that initiative is. And I will say for both the research and practice partners, you also always want to be thinking, who else needs to know? There's nothing that happens in schools that's done by just one or two people. There's so many different actors in the school community, in the broader education community. And so like within the district, are there other departments that, that you really want to connect with? Are there nonprofit partners that you want to work with? Have you talked to folks at the teachers union and the principals association? Because you want to have all those conversations, because you're going to need everybody together, working together if you're going to change practices in schools for the better.
Awesome. Thank you, Elaine. Dom, how about you? What's like one characteristic about your work with CPS that you feel is really core and is sort of a non-negotiable in how you're working together?
Yeah, and I think I want to tie in a little bit of that latter piece of the question too, of just kind of collective responsibility and I think just acknowledge this moment, right? I think it's critically important that we continue to fuel and stand up this deep history of having a data-informed culture that everybody has been referencing here, and particularly in this moment when doing that in spite of mischaracterizations and threats that are floating around equity-centered work nationally, right? And I think, I think there is a real kind of collective responsibility that's not just on CPS to continue to use data to push back against these mischaracterizations. And I'm a firm believer that, I think data is one of the best ways to make sure that we are being really clear and can clarify for folks that need clarification that equity-centered work is not an ideological effort, right? This is a strategic response to our mission as practitioners, as a district, as a city. It is us taking a really clear look around where we're making progress and where we're not, understanding our history and figuring out how we can use data to do something different to better support students that are furthest from opportunity. I think I've been really appreciative to live in Chicago, and I've been really appreciative of the district that has done something brave and stayed committed that equity is a part of this work because it is the right thing and the strategic thing that we need to do to achieve our mission of actually making sure that our system is working for all students. And so, again, I think that's on all of us. I think continuing to make sure that we're standing that up, being really clear about why we're doing this, and making sure that, again, we're trying to follow through on the promises that we make to families and communities that education is possible for everybody in this city.
Awesome. And we're certainly glad you're here in Chicago, Dom. Trust me. Terry, anything on your side, like sort of a key practice that you feel is really critical to your partnership with the district?
Sure. So I'll say our tagline at EC Reach is research-powered answers to community-driven questions. So your question about community is inherent to the questions that we
Perfect.
ask. And Chicago Public Schools is one member of that community, but we also think deeply about our community in terms of parents, providers, other community-based preschools, et cetera. In fact, tonight we have an Alliance Council meeting with about 50 different parents, teachers, researchers to kind of co-interpret results and kind of come up with solutions together. In terms of our partnership with Chicago Public Schools, I think I kind of echo my colleagues in that I don't take for granted how lucky we are to be in a city where we have partners who want to use evidence-based practices to inform decision-making. Early childhood education is chronically underfunded, and so we have to make sure those investments matter. And so being able to partner with Chicago Public Schools to really think about how best to support our earliest learners is critically important and something that I deeply value. And so for us at EC Reach to kind of honor that commitment from our partners is to ensure that we produce timely, relevant research that is deeply tied to those who are making decisions. What does that mean? It means we meet with CPS a lot, especially the Office of Early Childhood Education, to find out what questions they want to get answered and do it as quickly as we can in a way that would be most informative to them.
Awesome. Thank you, Terry. Same, Meg, for you, and as you think about your work, like what's a sort of core aspect of like how you engage with CPS, and as far as like your, you know, if someone was joining your organization, you're saying, here's the first thing you need to know about working with CPS.
Yeah, so I actually was maybe going to take a little different lens because I think the one organization on the panel
Statewide.
Statewide. Yeah. And so, you know, as part of that, I really have the privilege to travel all around the state and work with different districts and different communities. And I've been in, you know, the reddest of red places and the bluest of blue. And I kind of say that because I know we're in this, you know, fractured and, you know, divided and really painful moment. But what I have found in doing this work over the past 5 years is that if you are talking with folks about specific issues and working together on them, there really is no partisanship in that. People all over the state want to, you know, contribute to making children's lives better. And I'll just give a couple examples. So, you know, we have a bunch of projects on dual credit, improving access, even improving equity in that access for students of different groups. And some of our strongest and longest partners are in remote rural districts and community colleges downstate. So, you know, these folks all agree with this, the North Star of what we're doing in dual credit and what we want to research. A similar one is teacher shortages. We know that the places with the most teacher shortages are remote rural districts and highly urban districts. Now, it's really important to say the causes of the shortages are quite different in those areas, but the solutions provide a place for a lot of common cause, and people will come together around these specific issues. So what I like to say is if we focus on specifics, we can move forward in a nonpartisan way. And I really mean like nonpartisan, like let the issue be the issue. In terms of like the how, I always see it as the onus is on us as researchers to really, really listen. My kind of mantra is we need to do this research work in a way that someone would miss us if we weren't doing it. And historically, I think that education research hasn't necessarily done a great job of that. I think at best, you know, it's sort of like, what are those folks doing? And at worst, it seems punitive or out of touch. And so, you know, the way that we approach it is really engage, really listen, and set the standard that you are trying to understand something together to help everybody improve. And so kind of what we say about working with us is just approach us and let's hear what your problems are and let's work together. And it's always delightful when new districts across the state come to us and say, you know, we've never had a research practice partnership. We'd love to explore what this means. So happy for folks to come to us.
Thank you, Meg. And for the first Q&A from the audience, I'm going to actually kick that one to Monica because I think it's something that everyone's thinking about, certainly given what we talked about. So how do you decide what to research? So we've heard a couple of examples from other panelists sort of in the response to the questions, like how do you, Monica, and how do you and your team decide like what are the questions you're trying to answer?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I should say, you know, we're a relatively small faculty-led research organization at the University of Chicago. And so, of course, that does like sort of color what we're choosing to study. And we want to make sure that the things that we're studying really are evergreen and of interest to Chicago public schools, and we keep saying CPS as if it were a monolith, but like it is a very complex system comprised of, you know, leadership with Chief Chkoumbova and the research office and department heads and, you know, content experts and school leaders and then teachers and paraprofessionals and students and families. I mean, and it's not always true that all of those individuals at varying levels of the system have the same goals in very specific ways, just to Meg's point. But it is true that all of us care about kids. We want the best for kids. We all, you know, we all want our kids to be able to like learn math and read. And the question is about the tactics. And to me, that's an empirical question. And so I think we really, Meg mentioned listening. And so I think our job is to listen in a variety of rooms and to physically be there. Like, I really just think you can't do this job. Ironically, we're on a webinar right now, but I think you can't really do this job from afar. And so our job is to like crouch in the back of a classroom, to listen to kids, to be at LSC meetings, to be at board meetings, and to have our ear to the ground with various civic, philanthropic, community-based organizations, because Chicago is a rich tapestry of kind of this external exoskeleton of organizations. And as researchers, it's our job to kind of pull out what the through line is. What are people saying that they're interested in knowing across those individuals that feels evergreen and true, and then cross-referencing that with like, what do we not know yet in the field? Like, when I have a kid who is 19 and has 3 credits and has not benefited from the mainstream education system, what do I do with that kid? Like, there's lots of good intent, there's lots of caring adults, but like, what are the strategies that I can employ in a way that I know for a fact are going to be effective at making that kid, you know, graduate, be, you know, get a job, be, you know, enter in a post-secondary school or credential. And so that really, I think, is our job, to sort of listen, to be in these spaces physically, to thread that needle, and then to say back, here's what I think a question is. Here's the conglomeration of partners and partnerships that you could put together, not just to design the intervention, but then also to test and scale it, and then make sure that there's a feedback loop from like what we've learned. So hopefully that's responsive to the question, but it's like a lot of talking, it's a lot of assembling partnerships, but it's just making sure that, you know, what we're researching is relevant. And to me, you didn't ask this question, but I think the metric for this is, do people care about the findings? Like, and to me, the like best thing that I experience as a researcher is when people are like emailing me like, when are these findings going to be out? When are we going to learn this? When can we share? And to me, that's like, all right, this is producing something that is of value, that is going to inform a decision that hopefully will make a student's experience better. And like, that's kind of the holy grail.
Awesome. Thank you, Monica. Next question I'm going to ask, teed up for Elaine. It's a great question. It's my favorite kind of question. There's obviously a lot of challenges in the education research space right now at the federal levels. Where do we need to invest, or what do you need for your research practice partnerships to be successful as far as data infrastructure, partners at the table? Like, what are the sort of like, if you sort of have the magic wand to strengthen all your partnerships, what would that look like? I'll start with Elaine.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different resources that are needed. Certainly the commitment on both sides, and I think the supports for doing this kind of work and understanding how to do this kind of work. You need a lot of time committed to do the kind of the conversations that all the partners here have talked about. Really, that time for listening and building knowledge, learning back and forth from each other. So that does take a commitment of time, of resources, and a desire to really see this through and support the other partners.
Awesome, thank you. And then I think Sarah is still on, so I wouldn't mind if Sarah jumped in on this sort of infrastructure, where should we be investing question.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much. It's always so wonderful to hear y'all talk about our work. I think to me, some of the investment is just about it's making sure that even in this difficult moment, we all remain committed to the goal of really trying to understand the world around us and the situation that we're in. You know, I think that from my perspective, there's really no such thing as a bad research finding. There's only learning that can come out of research, because from my perspective, you know, data isn't truth and research isn't magic. Data is just information that we use to help us understand our experiences. And from my perspective, partnership, like the research practice partnerships represented on this call, is what makes that possible.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to all of our panelists. Really appreciate the insights and intel. I'm going to hand it back over to Jess for a quick wrap up.
Yes, and very quickly, just like an absolute round of applause for everyone joining us here today. Thank you so much for sharing. What a rich conversation. And thank you to everyone who joined here today. We will have a recap of this. I hope that work and energy that everyone has shared provides fuel for you in your work. Keep an eye out on our website and make sure that you sign up for emails from everyone and that you're staying connected so that you can stay connected to this great work. And we want to work with you. We work in collaboration, as you've heard from everyone, and we work in partnership and we work in sharing this work. So reach out, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.